Yeah, so for those who are new with us, this is your first week here at GFC. We're going to be on this roller coaster of a sermon today. My name is Patrick Smith, if you don't know me, and I am not typically up here. This is absolutely terrifying for me. It's super warm and uncomfortable. I would rather sort of be in the shadows in the back. A lot of you know me back in the booth or helping out with the tech here. But we got to go through this sermon class, to understand how sermons are prepared, how they're useful for small groups and for youth group and some other circumstances. And at the end, we get to be up here, as terrifying as it is. And regardless, this will be a growing experience for both of us. For those who don't know me, I got married back in 2021 to my beautiful wife, Faith. And this year we celebrated 5 years of marriage together. Thank you. We got plugged into GFC shortly after we got married, and Corey was actually my youth pastor growing up, so we reconnected and started coming here to GFC and got plugged in, started doing tech. Faith helps out in nursery. We have helped out in youth group, and sometimes you'll see me be lucky enough to play the drums. But we got to celebrate 5 years this year, and this is a picture of us at the Grand Canyon, so we were lucky enough to go this year. And the next slide is actually just a picture of us, or a picture of the Grand Canyon without us in it, so you can just enjoy what that looks like. But before I start off, I sort of want to get us thinking this morning about sort of our personal lives. And I want to start off with a few questions here. When you guys go on trips, are you the planner, or are you sort of relying on someone else in your family to plan the whole thing? Do your trips go as planned? Are you more of a prepper or go with the flow? In my family, just Faith and I right now, we are actually both planners. And that is an okay thing to have as long as you delegate the planning. And for this trip, we delegated the planning. I was sort of doing more of the macro, how we're getting places, plane tickets, lodging, that sort of thing. And Faith would be doing more of the day-to-day itinerary, figuring out where we're going for that day, how many coffee shops are we visiting, that sort of thing. And it was such a blast. But as we have this conversation today, I want to pose this first question to us. And that question is this: Jesus is planning a trip back to earth. Do you feel prepared for him to come back? See, we are on this rock in space called Earth, rocketing through space and time. You have this place to prepare Jesus coming back. And the best way to demonstrate that is to disciple people to Jesus, with whom gives eternal life. And I don't want to ask this question as sort of this guilt trip or this anxiety-inducing question for us. Maybe we're not doing enough, and that's not the point of this question. The point of this is to set the tone for what we're about to go through today, and I sort of want you to jot this down and sort of tuck it in the back of your mind, and we'll sort of come back to it at the end of our conversation. But today I get the privilege and honor to go through Mark chapter 9, and so far this year we have been going through this book. We've done a couple other mini-series, but we're back in Mark, and so far we've seen Jesus perform miracles, people's reactions, responses to those miracles, and sort of the disciples not understanding most of what Jesus says, and then Jesus having to spend time and pouring into them to bring understanding. And this week in chapter 9, we're going to see that pattern come out. Chapter 9 is split up into 3 sections, and we're going to go through the first section and kind of dive into it. The second section, dive into it. The third section is going to be an opportunity for you guys to go through in your own quiet time or devotional time this week. And whenever I sort of dive into a passage, I'm a visual learner, and I like to, just like Pastor Andrew last week, I'm going to sort of provide us some visuals. So we're going to pull up this map and sort of go through where we're at. So on the left-hand side, we have the Mediterranean Sea. This is a picture of sort of the Middle East and Judea and Israel. And today we're going to be talking about the northern part. We have the Dead Sea at the bottom with the Jordan River coming up to the Sea of Galilee. We have a stretch of mountains coming down, and we're sort of going to be in that pocket this morning. But you also notice on the map, it's sort of hard to see a little bit, but there's all these red lines. And so these red lines are an estimate of Jesus' travel throughout this time and throughout his 3 years in ministry. And there's these 5 sort of loops that Jesus takes in his route throughout this place. And if I was one of Jesus' disciples, I would be a little irritated because I'm an efficiency guy. I'm actually an engineer by trade. So finding the best way to get through the places as efficient as possible is sort of how my mind works. And I would be a little bit frustrated if I was Jesus' disciples back then. But the fact is, Jesus was not here to be efficient. He was here to be effective. And the fact that we get to have these conversations, we have the written word, these testaments of his experiences 2,000 years later, means that he wasn't worried about picking the best route to take. And I think today, for us, we have this pressure to be time efficient. You know, school's just starting, there's a change in our lives, we have a lot of things going on, there's busyness in our lives, and there's going to be these opportunities that come up that might be inconvenient or inefficient. And my encouragement to you today is to be stretched and come out of your comfort zone as I'm sweating up here on stage, and just be reminded that we're here to have an impactful life, and we're supposed to be discipling people. So to go back to the map at today's conversation, we're in these 2 areas called Caesarea Philippi and Mount Hermon. So Andrew had brought up this crazy map of switching back and forth. And at the end of chapter 8, we leave Bethsaida, which is sort of the on the northern side of the Sea of Galilee, and we travel up to Caesarea Philippi. And then in chapter 9, we go from there up to Mount Hermon. We come back to Caesarea Philippi, and then we end up going back later to Capernaum at the end of chapter 9. Again, not the most efficient, but definitely the most effective. In the context of the rest of the Bible, this would be correlated to Matthew chapter 17 and 18 and Luke chapter 9. The Gospel of John would have accounted for this in between chapters 6 and 7. And before we actually dive into the word, I want to remind us of the follow-along. Here's the QR code that you can use if you're at home, or if you want to use a digital platform. There's also, you can scan the card on the back of your seats. There's going to be a lot of references that I'm going to bring up today that aren't necessarily on the slides. They're going to be on the follow-along, as well as our devotionals. Here's another QR code for the devotionals. There's going to be that third section as well that I'm not going to go over today. That's going to be an important piece in your quiet time this week. So we're gonna dive right into Mark chapter 9, verse 1. Jesus went on to say, "I tell you the truth. Some standing here right now will not die before they see the kingdom arrive in great power." Verses 2 to 4. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain to be alone. As the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed, and his clothes became dazzling white, far whiter than any earthly bleach could ever make them. Then Elijah and Moses appeared and began talking with Jesus. 5 to 6. Peter exclaimed, "Rabbi, it is wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He said this because he really didn't know what else to say, for they were all terrified. 7 to 8. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my dearly loved son, listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, Moses and Elijah were gone, and they saw only Jesus with them. 9 to 10. As they went back down the mountain, he told them not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept it to themselves, but they often asked each other what he meant by rising from the dead. 11 to 13. Then they asked him, "Why do the teachers of religious law insist that Elijah must return before the Messiah comes?" Jesus responded, "Elijah is indeed coming first to get everything ready. Yet why do the scriptures say that the Son of Man must suffer greatly and be treated with utter contempt? But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they chose to abuse him, just as the scriptures predicted." So this is sort of a weird and potentially confusing passage in the Bibles, especially if you're sort of a newer Christian. And I sort of wanted to break this down. We have the disciples go up to Caesarea Philippi. Jesus chooses a select few to go up on the mountain. Then Jesus' appearance transforms. Moses and Elijah are there. Jesus' face and appearance changes and sort of glows, and God speaks, and then they sort of come back down and have this debrief. And the question is, what is this transfiguration that we're talking about? And I have sort of this clinical definition of it as well as this meaning. So before we had these English translations, we had, or the early manuscripts of this would have been written in Greek. And the collection of these manuscripts would have been known as the Septuagint. And as sort of a nerd, I like to understand a little bit about the Hebrew and the Greek. So I pulled the definition for the word transfiguration that we can find in this passage, and that word is called metamorphathy. And that means to be changed or to be transformed. And in the Greek, whenever we have words or phrases of words, they actually act as hyperlinks to other passages. And in some of these other passages found in Romans and in 1 Corinthians, we have this word come up, metamorphathy, and it talks about the renewal of your mind and sort of the changing, the thorough changing of your heart. The root, metamorph, is also from metamorphosis, where we get sort of the caterpillar changing into a butterfly. It's sort of this irreversible, in-depth change. And I want to bring that up because it's not like Jesus was on this mountain and he snapped his fingers and boom, he's got a tuxedo on. His appearance has changed and sort of he started glowing and sort of there's this in and out appearance. And it's not just on the outside, it's internal. And so what does this mean for us as Christians on this side of the cross? And I think this event is important to us for this reading. So this is sort of the meaning, not necessarily the definition of the transfiguration. And I put it this way, that it's the declaration from God that the word made manifest is fulfilled and the kingdom of God has arrived. So that might sound like a bunch of mumbo jumbo to you, but essentially the point is this is sort of the pinnacle moment where God, for 30 years now, 30-ish years now, Jesus has been on this earth in human flesh, and his glory is sort of veiled in this human form. He's still fully God and fully human, but this is sort of the first instance where he gets to peel off and expose his glory on earth. And he's had these different miracles that he has shown us his divine nature before, but this is sort of the first time that we get to see him in his true self. It's sort of the moment where his glory is unveiled on earth. To bring sort of the visuals of this area, this land that we're in, I started Googling sort of the names and wanted to get distances. So we're going to pull up a Google Maps image here of the space that we're in. And we have Caesarea Philippi sort of in the lower point there, and we have Mount Hermon, the peak that we believe that Jesus had this event happen. And the linear distance between these 2 points is a little bit over 15 miles. And that's as the crow flies. That's not including trails and switchbacks and elevation changes. And the thing that's funny about this is at the beginning I mentioned that Faith and I went to the Grand Canyon, and the distances that we ended up traveling was about the same. So back in January when we were planning this trip, we were researching and trying to figure out where we can go at the Grand Canyon, and there's certain places that you need a permit, you need like a trail guide to go into. And so when we originally planned this, there's this thing called the Rim Trail, and it sort of just goes along the edge of the Grand Canyon. We're content with just taking pictures. It's gorgeous up there. It's a beautiful view. And the night before we sort of scheduled this specific journey to the national park there, I found out that we didn't need a permit or any special regulation to go into it. So it took a lot of convincing on my part to tell Faith and sort of convince her to go down into the Grand Canyon all the way to the bottom, wanted to see the Colorado River. And so this is actually a picture of us at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And it was an awesome journey. We barely made it out. It was my knees still hurt thinking about it. But on the right-hand side are some statistics of our travels. And we used this app called All Trails that sort of logged where we were going and did elevation change and some really cool things. But the total distance from the top of the Grand Canyon to the bottom and back again is over 15 miles. It's 15 and a half miles. The elevation change is about a mile, and it took us over 10 hours to do this journey. We were definitely sweating. And a few weeks ago, Corey mentioned that Jesus' ministry traveled at about 3 miles to the hour. And if you look at the statistics and crunch the numbers, Faith and I only moved about 1.5 miles an hour. So Jesus probably would have whipped us in this journey. But I kind of, this would have still taken them hours. This isn't just a weekend trip with the boys. This isn't just a quick up a quick hill. This would have taken some time and created a lot of opportunities for the disciples and Jesus to have deep and meaningful conversations. Some other things, some other statistics, at the height of the Grand Canyon, it's about 7,200 feet, and at the bottom is about 2,200 feet. So that's where you get about the mile of elevation change. And for Mount Hermon, so this is actually a picture of Mount Hermon. The height of it is about 2,300 feet, and Caesarea Philippi at the base would have been about 1,150 height and elevation. And for reference, New Holland is typically between 4 and 550 feet in elevation. And this sort of changes my view of this area. If you notice, there's snow on these mountains. I would typically bestow the image of like this arid, dry place, sort of like the Grand Canyon in the previous pictures of the area that we're in. And in the next picture, there's actually a view from on top of Mount Hermon, and there's just snow for miles. There's actually ski resorts and stuff up there now, so that's why there's these poles all over the place. But this sort of changes the way I view this story. See, in the story, we have Jesus going up on this mountain, and his form is he's transformed. He's transfigured into this otherworldly, supernatural, this crazy, glowing. We have the other Gospels record this as Jesus' appearance was white as lightning, white as snow, like the radiant sun. Mark says it's whiter than any earthly bleach. And when we're up here and we're after this hike, I'm just imagining like the disciples are walking up all these miles up this mountain. They're probably wearing some sort of sandal. Their feet are probably cold. It's probably a little chilly, and it's probably really quiet up here as well. And so I'm just picturing them like sit down, resting. They feel the warmth of the sun as it comes out, and maybe they close their eyes and they open, and it's like, well, that's actually not the sun, that's Jesus. And they look over, and Jesus is talking with Moses and Elijah. There's sort of this change in the dynamics, and with Jesus' face glowing, that's actually a link back to the Old Testament when Moses goes back up the mountain the second time to get the 10 Commandments. He ends up bringing a group of people with him up this mountain, Mount Sinai, and then he actually goes further and sort of leaves them behind and then communes with God for 40 days and 40 nights, receives the 10 Commandments, and when he comes back, his face was glowing, and it's reflecting the glory of God. But this is Jesus we're talking about, and he is the Son of God, and he is God made manifest. So this is an elevation where he's actually glowing the glory of God instead of just reflecting God's glory. So this crazy experience up on the mountain, the super bright, super visual, and then we have Moses and Elijah up there. What's the big deal with Moses and Elijah? I don't think they won the lottery in heaven to go back and visit Earth for a day. I think they're here and were chosen for specific reasons. And I have listed some of these reasons here. They are in the Hebrew mind, in the New Testament, first century Jewish person, they would have been the two most important figures when we're talking about Scripture and sort of what we know as the Old Testament today. Moses is cited to write the sort of first 5 books of the Bible, which we know as the Torah or the law or the instruction manual for how Israel is to sort of conduct their lives on earth. We also have Elijah, who's considered one of the most greatest prophets. He sort of becomes the prototype for the prophets to come and sort of this template for different characters or people in the Bible to fit into this mold. They are also the only other 2 people directly cited to go in the wilderness, fast for 40 days and 40 nights, and commune with God. And they both have experiences with God on mountaintops. Ultimately, I think Moses and Elijah were here because they pointed people to Jesus, ultimately, through the representation of the word, and them showing up on the mountain is a declaration of Jesus fulfilling the scriptures and a new covenant being written. We also have some other people on the mountain. We have these 3 disciples. Why does Jesus bring the 3 disciples up with him? Well, I think he brought them for a few reasons. I think it's to show them a sneak peek of heaven. I think God enjoys showing us different aspects of himself, and I think Jesus was maybe a little excited. He's probably hearing the disciples like, Jesus, why are we going all this way out in the middle of nowhere? Why are we hiking for miles? And I think Jesus would have been like, well, just wait until you get to the top for me to show you something crazy. I think it's also to invest in their faith. See, this will be a moment in their lives. Once all of the trials happen and Jesus post-cross and we have the early church, I think this will be a trigger for them to remember this moment and sort of the stake in the ground that this event would have created for them to be able to strengthen their faith. And there's all this time and energy that they're doing, and we get a little bit of the conversation when they come back down the mountain to ask questions. I think there was more questions, and I would have been asking all sorts of questions if I was one of those disciples coming back down the mountain. But we also have the other 9 that were left behind. And it's a space for them to sort of operate autonomously, representing Jesus, and be able to exercise their faith back in the town. We see Jesus is on this journey to give people the good news and display his arrival and the work he is to do on this earth. And he's bringing his disciples along on this journey. And the fact is if you know Jesus, we are all on a journey with Jesus. And most of the time, I know I'm on this journey, and I love being on this journey, and I'm excited and joyful and happy, and sometimes I don't necessarily. And this can be a little bit of a struggle if you know Jesus and you feel like you're traveling on this journey, and maybe you're kicking and screaming, and you don't know if you're following up the right mountain necessarily, pursuing Jesus, or there's these multitude of decisions, and you're trying to pick the right one to sort of honor God and glorify God, but there are these moments in your walk where you don't necessarily feel the best. I know that in my life. Like, I don't have miraculous signs and wonders in every corner sort of as an attaboy or an encouragement to keep going. And there's these moments where I feel intentional in trying to pursue Jesus, and maybe I'm having a conversation with someone and I bring Jesus up, and it ends up being a little bit of awkwardness. It introduces some awkwardness and sort of embarrassing, and most of the time it doesn't feel great. And maybe we don't know if we're going the right way, and maybe we're not going the wrong way. Maybe we know we're not going in that direction, but we kind of feel like we're lingering, or we're sort of in this wander state or lost, and we're sort of waiting to hear something from God. There's going to be these moments in all of our journeys with Jesus where we don't necessarily feel the fire of the Spirit burning in us and having these mountaintop highs. We feel like Jesus may be a few miles ahead of us, and we're trying to play catch up, and we're trying to work on the devotionals, and we're trying to pray, but we don't remember the last time we just had a conversation with God when we're just asking him to provide and do these things and show up in our lives. And I think all of this is part of the journey. And I imagine there was a lot of this going on even with the disciples who were physically with Jesus. We see Jesus sort of pick these 3 disciples, and there's these 9 that are left behind, and we can feel like the 9 that are left behind, and maybe we're judging others or comparing our story, or, man, that guy's on fire. I wish Jesus was doing that in my life. But the fact is, our journeys should not be compared to others. There were other disciples that were left in Philippi, Caesarea, that didn't get to experience this event. And we can start comparing our relationship with Jesus and seeing how others' relationship is, and you're measuring, and what's going to happen is your shift is going to focus from here, and you're going to start focusing on that. And you're going to start wandering and not following Jesus on the journey. I can relate to this, especially when it's about sharing my testimony. See, when I was 7-ish years old, I had a conversation after church with my parents and ended up getting to know Jesus and invited him into my life and saved. And that's not a fantastic, super dynamic, contrasty story where maybe I was living in sin and in darkness, and I was at the bottom of the pit, and then boom, Jesus met me, and I accepted the free gift of everlasting life through him, and now my journey has dramatically changed. See, our journeys don't start when we meet Jesus. Our journeys start when we're born on this earth, and they end when we die. And Jesus is going to meet you at some point along that journey, and until you die, everything that happens in your life is part of that testimony. Your journey doesn't end when you get saved. Our journey ends when we get to heaven, and we start a new one out of perfection and completeness with Jesus, because of Jesus. See, the fact is Jesus wants you to see and know him. And it's important to Jesus that you know who he is. And it's not just this list of facts, this head knowledge that Jesus is kind and gracious and is the Prince of Peace, and you know all of these things about him. He wants you to know him and experience him and have a relationship with him. He's coming along with us on this journey and wants to reveal himself to us. He's intentional with his disciples to be able to create spaces for questions, to be open and approachable, to have them get to know who he is and understand what he is doing, to the point where we had crowds of people, 4,000 people, try and surround him to get truth out of him. And we have the same ability to get to know Jesus through prayer. There's a direct line that we have with Jesus. And again, we want to use that to have a relationship with him. It's not these list of facts that we have. It's sort of the same idea that I have knowledge of my wife's phone number versus using it to call her. We also get to experience Jesus in each other through our testimonies and stories and fellowship here Sunday mornings. That's part of what we're here to do. But in order for us to sort of know him, we have to recognize who Jesus is. See, back in chapter 8, Peter declares Jesus is the Messiah. And the next chapter, we go up this mountain, and God speaks from the mountain and declares that he is his son. And we have Moses and Elijah that are representing God's word to the Israelites at the time, and it's being revealed and fulfilled in Jesus. And I want to point out how sort of Peter responds in this moment. And I want to give some grace to Peter. Peter and I have a lot in common. We're socially awkward. We don't know necessarily what to say or what to do, but we know we have to do something. And in this moment, Peter speaks and recognizes that he wants to sort of build these shelters as memorials for Jesus, Elijah, and Moses. And God speaks. The next thing that is said is God speaking and says, "This is my son, listen to him." See, Peter wanted to build these memorial shelters, sort of as a traditional sort of, this is sort of Peter taking a selfie and putting it in a scrapbook, is sort of the analogy here, where in the Old Testament, whenever we see God showing up on a mountain, what would happen is that person, whether it be Abraham or Isaac or pick a character, and they would stop and recognize that this would be a holy moment here on earth, on this mountaintop, and they would build an altar. And other sort of flavors or translations, we have booths or shelters or altars being the substitute word here. And that's sort of the operative word here. But what I want us to understand in this moment is Peter wanted to build an altar to remember what God is doing on that mountaintop. And I think us on this side, in today's context, we need to stop and recognize who God is by spending time remembering what he did and how faithful he was in our lives. Sort of cataloging this moment. And by doing this, we recognize who he is because of what he has done. And by figuring out what he's done, you can know who Jesus is, and that sort of makes what he did meaningful. The fact is, Jesus is God, the ultimate power, being, person in the universe, created everything, and this big, enormous person wants to know little me and wants a relationship with me. And the fact is, Jesus has done a bunch of things. He has done the work on the cross. He has worked in all of our lives, all of the blessings and answered prayers and his faithfulness. Everything that he did is meaningful because of who he is. It's not about the gift, it's about the giver. And the goal of being saved by Jesus isn't so you and I can just live for eternity. So the fact is, we're going to live for eternity, but we get to live with Jesus for eternity. That's why it matters. It's this experiential versus function. Jesus isn't this vending machine. He isn't just you call him when you need him. He wants a relationship with you. And he's done more for us than we can ever know. And we're going to read another example of his power and majesty here. So we're going to get back into chapter 9, and we're going to start at 14 and 15 here. When they returned to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd surrounding them, and some of the teachers of religious law were arguing with them. When the crowd saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with awe, and they ran to greet him. 16 to 18. What is all this arguing about? Jesus asked. One of the men in the crowd spoke up and said, "Teacher, I brought my son so you could heal him. He is possessed by an evil spirit that won't let him talk, and whenever the spirit seizes him, it throws him violently to the ground. Then he foams at the mouth and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast out the evil spirit, but they could not do it. 19 to 21. Jesus said to them, you faithless people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. So they brought the boy, but when the evil spirit saw Jesus, it threw the child into a violent convulsion, and he fell to the ground, writhing and foaming at the mouth. How long has this been happening? Jesus asked the boy's father, 21 and 24. He replied, since he was a little boy, the spirit often throws him into the fire or into water, trying to kill him. Have mercy on us and help us if you can. What do you mean, if I can? Jesus asked. Anything is possible if a person believes. The father instantly cried out, I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. 25 to 26. When Jesus saw the crowd of onlookers growing, he rebuked the evil spirit. Listen, you spirit that makes this boy unable to hear and speak, he said. I command you to come out of this child and never enter him again. The spirit screamed and threw the boy into another violent convulsion and left him. The boy appeared to be dead. A murmur ran through the crowd as the people said, he's dead. 27 to 29. But Jesus took him by the hand and helped him to his feet and stood up. Afterward, when Jesus was alone in the house with the disciples, they asked him, why couldn't we cast out the evil spirit? Jesus replied, this kind can only be cast out by prayer. We get another eclectic story about demon possession in Mark here, and this time it's with a boy, and this father brings his child. He doesn't know Jesus isn't there. He just knows Jesus is in the area, and he finds his disciples, and the disciples aren't able to help, and then Jesus comes back in the nick of time, back from his excursion, and is able to redeem this child. And I want to highlight something here that might be sort of a hidden detail that can be hard to see the first time reading this, but Jesus expects us to be working while he's away. There's this expectation where, like if you're growing up and your parents leave and they're saying, hey, you have refrigerator rights for the next hour, take care of yourself, you're autonomous. This is the same expectation that I think is on these disciples, where they are supposed to do work in Jesus' name while he is working away. And sort of the way we can understand this today is we are supposed to be working while he is away, and he's going to be coming back soon. But in the meantime, we have to be doing everything we can to bring the kingdom closer. See, I think there's a struggle in the Christian walk where because Jesus can do everything for me, I don't have to do anything. And I think there's a lot of the times where maybe we can't do something, and I get there's this tension between praying to God and asking him to show up, and then also helping bring that to fruition. I don't think we can be couch Christians today. I think we have to be the hands and feet of Jesus, doing everything we can. And the fact is, Jesus has already done the most important work on a cosmic scale that will ever have to be done. But we have work in our daily lives that we need to be doing to bring glory to Jesus. And Jesus has already equipped us with all we need to do that. See, back in chapter 6, before the group and Jesus were traveling through the area, he sent out his disciples and blessed them with sort of these supernatural gifts of like healing and powers and gifts. And likewise, we have some of these unique and spiritual gifts. And I sort of put a list up here of the kinds of spiritual gifts that we have today. We have sort of these innate gifts. Manifest, we can find that in 1 Corinthians 12. We have words of wisdom, words of knowledge, and these extraordinary faith in God. And we also have this discernment, distinguishing between good and evil and truth and not truth. We also have these motivational gifts, things that we can do for each other. We can find that in Romans and 1 Peter. We have serving, teaching, exhortation, or encouraging and motivating others. We have extraordinary giving, leadership, showing mercy and deep compassion to people that are suffering, and then shepherding, caring for the spiritual welfare of others. And in this moment, the disciples still have these gifts and weren't able to use these because they needed to pray. And I don't know if this was just a moment where Jesus knows everything, but maybe they were supposed to fail and create an opportunity for Jesus to show up and sort of heal the faith in the Father. See, Jesus asked that we have faith, and it's not necessarily the amount of faith that we have. It's kind of like the loaves and fish in the previous encounters that we have with Jesus. There were loaves and fish to multiply. I'm not saying Jesus couldn't have done the miracle without something to start with, but anything times 0 is harder to multiply than anything times something. Jesus partners with us with our faith and is able to show up and impact other people's lives. Did you notice how the father brings the boy and asks if you can heal? And we have this sort of this fiery comeback from Jesus. What do you mean if I can? Anyone who believes. And the fact is, we are people's first impression of Jesus, and that's true with the disciples in this moment. Jesus was gone, and the disciples were there, and this father brought the boy and expected Jesus to be there. And when they failed, it ended up hurting the father's faith in Jesus. And the father is honest and open about it and is saying, I do believe, but help me with my unbelief. But our lack of faith can affect others. See, when people know that you know Jesus and are a follower of Jesus and a disciple of Jesus, and then you say the things that Jesus is going to show up, but then you do the things that don't match, and there's this confusion that can happen. And at worst, we sort of look like hypocrites when we don't trust in Jesus to show up. When people see you, what you say and what you do they see a strong faith in Jesus and his abilities? And I understand that there's things that are sort of outside of our control. There's things that we're just going to fail, and there's some things that are God-sized problems. And when we try and fix God's problems by ourselves, we will fail. There's things that we simply cannot do, and the only thing that we can do is pray to God like the disciples should have, which is asking Jesus and inviting Jesus into this space and showing up and working in an extraordinary way. And I have lots of stories about sort of these spiritual failures and these opportunities for Jesus to show up. I had this friend I got to meet in college, and he was staying the night. We had a game night, and I got to know him a little bit, and he grew up going to church. And in high school and in college, he sort of had a lot of struggles and doubts and ended up fighting God and sort of fell out of step with the Lord. And so we had this late night conversation, as young people typically do. It ends up not going out well. It ended up sort of being this theological debate where I was sort of like fighting him, like this sword fight, in these apologetic and sort of these clinical statements where he was like, I don't think this, I believe that, God is wrong, I hate God, and there's these things that came up. And in the moment, the way I wanted to respond, I was like, well, we can fix that. We can have that conversation. Here's a theological point. You need to look at this more. And I wasn't treating him sort of as a human. I was treating him as sort of something I could fix. And so we had this conversation that sort of led into more of an argument, if anything else. And we ended up zonking out and falling asleep. And he ended up having to go to work the next day. And so he had to get up early. And we never got to finish that conversation. And a number of years later, I ended up reconnecting with this individual, and that conversation got brought up again, and he said, Pat, that conversation stuck with me. And it was not a good stuck with me. He was carrying this burden with him, And what happened was Jesus invited some other friends in his life where they actually surrounded him and discipled him and invited him into church. And what happened was they wanted to go on a journey with this person to meet Jesus rather than trying to fix something overnight. And I did not handle that situation well and didn't treat my friend very well. But the fact is, God is playing the long game with us, and he's going to reveal himself to us for our good and for his glory. And Jesus wants to be shared with others. And it feels great. There's something unique and special about sharing Jesus with someone, and they end up receiving that gift. But sort of the first step, the precursor for that, is if someone knows if you know Jesus. They don't know to come to you and ask about these spiritual things if you don't share Jesus with them, if you're not bringing Jesus up in conversations. It's sort of, again, if I talk about Faith, my wife, if I have conversations with other people about her, there's something that's revealed in our relationship. And that can be carried in a good light as well as in a negative light. See, in the end of chapter 16 in Mark, we have this Great Commission, which is to go into all the world and preach the good news to everyone. And in other passages, it means to disciple others to know Jesus. And that's sort of this mentorship, long-term relationship where we get to share these altars that we built in our lives with this other person. And to effectively point people to Jesus and disciple them, we have to know Jesus and be spending time with Jesus. So I want to circle back to the first question here, which was, Jesus is planning a trip back to earth. Do you feel prepared for him to come back? And just how Jesus sort of answers questions with questions, I put up two questions that I think if you're able to answer effectively, you can answer the first one. And the first one is, do you know Jesus? Like, do you have a relationship with Jesus? And if you don't have that relationship, please ask somebody. If you're new here, ask the person that brought you, ask any of the leadership here, ask Pastor Corey or Pastor Andrew. We would love to introduce you to Jesus. And the second thing is spend time with Jesus. We need to be spending time digging into his word. We have the devotionals throughout the week. We have this thing called prayer. We need to be spending time having conversations with Jesus. And the second thing is, are you sharing Jesus with others? We have to be very proactive, especially us that suffer from social anxiety, to introduce Jesus into conversations, even if it's awkward and it doesn't feel great. So this week, I want to sort of, as an easy list of things to be able to share Jesus with this week, I want to be able to effectively point someone to Jesus this week. I want you guys to point someone to Jesus this week as we sort of wrap up our time here. These are the three things I want you to do. I want you to spend time in prayer thanking Jesus for his faithfulness for three separate occasions. This is the moment where we stop and recognize who Jesus is, what he has done in our lives, and doing that 3 times and thanking him for that. And then the other thing I want you to do is share one of those occasions, one of those moments that Jesus has shown up in your life with someone else. And this is super effective, especially like for parents in the room, to share these altars in your lives with your kids or brothers and sisters or friends in Christ. This is super effective into building our faith up in Jesus and understanding how he's working in our lives. And the last one is bring Jesus up in a conversation this week. And this would be targeted outside of your family. Bring him up. If one of your coworkers, it could be a small, hey, how was your weekend? This nervous kid got up on stage and talked about Jesus. It could be you get coffee with someone, and you end up having a spiritual conversation. But I want you to bring Jesus up in a conversation this week.